Welcome to Twilight Fables, where bedtime stories are best left untold. Tonight, we begin our descent into the mist-shrouded waters of Swan Lake, but not as you remember it. This is a tale of broken vows, twisted forms, and a curse that sinks deeper than feathers and flesh. Keep your eyes on the shore, because once you're in the lake, it never lets you go. There was a stretch of land in the far north where no roads led. A forest walled it in, dense and tangled, always wet with fog that never seemed to burn off. Even in the height of summer, the villagers spoke of it rarely, and only under breath. They called it Godless Hollow, though none could recall when the name first took root. It was the kind of place that gnawed at the bones of memory, eroding what had once been real into rumour, and at its centre was the lake. Odette had seen it first at the age of 16, when her father's hunting party strayed too far. A nobleman's daughter, she had been carried along for the season's leisure, dressed in pale silks, riding astride a black mare named Lyra. The others hadn't noticed when she went still. They hadn't seen the way her eyes fixed forward, unblinking. She'd frozen on the forest path, the reins slack in her gloved hands, her mouth slightly open, as if she were about to speak. The lake had pulled at her. No one else saw it, not yet, but Odette had heard something, a kind of song not made with human throat or tongue, faint as a breath against frost, and for a moment her body didn't belong to her. She would not remember how she returned, only that she did, with mud-stained slippers and scratches on her arms she couldn't explain. 3 days later, her father fell ill. By the week's end, he was gone. No wound, no fever, only stillness. No one in court could explain it, though they whispered of wasting curses and ghosts in the night. Her mother followed in the month after, her mind unravelling thread by thread, like a gown eaten by moths. Odette, orphaned, inherited a crumbling estate and silence. She didn't return to the lake for years, but she dreamed of it constantly. It began with blood, tiny streaks of it on her pillow. At first, she thought it came from her nose, until she found the white filament lying in its centre, a feather, not large, but perfect, curved just so, whiter than any swan's down, and humming with a faint heat, like it had just been plucked. She stared at it in the candlelight, heart ticking like a cracked clock. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, and in that instant, it disintegrated into smoke. She told no one. That night, her bones screamed. She awoke with her hands clutching the bedposts, wrists twisted as if trying to pull them from the frame. Her legs kicked violently beneath the sheets, and when she screamed, it came out as a choking hiss. Her voice had gone raw, and her fingernails were black with something that glistened. She began locking her door, but it didn't help. Each night, the dreams came stronger, and she began to feel her body reshaping in sleep, a slow, horrific stretching, like her ribs were trying to escape through her skin. Her eyes would open to glimpses of feathers protruding from her arms, slick with blood, only to vanish the moment she tried to rise. The curse was not just a spell, it was a possession, and the lake was calling her home. Odette fled the estate on the eve of her 21st birthday. She did not take a carriage. She wore no jewels. She dressed in a tattered cloak, boots still damp from her last escape attempt, and walked into the forest under a sky smeared with cloud. The hounds didn't bark. The servants didn't stir. It was as if the entire house had fallen into the same coma that had taken her parents. She knew the way now. Even in pitch darkness, the trees pulled back for her, the fog parted, and in less than an hour, she stood at the edge of Godless Hollow, staring down at the mirror-like surface of the lake. No ripples, no breeze, just stillness, like a canvas painted in deep greys. And he was waiting. Not a man, not a beast, a shape, tall and draped in wings, like cloaks of ash. His face was hidden behind an owl-like mask, carved from bone. The sockets were hollow, but she felt him watching her. "Odette," he said, in a voice like rotting leaves. Her knees gave out. "Please, I never..." "You came of your own will." Again, he took a step forward, bare feet sinking into the mud without sound. "Do you remember your vow?" "I made no vow," she whispered, even as her throat burned. "I was a child. You danced under moonlight. You drank from the lake. You heard my song and did not turn away." He raised one taloned hand. The bond was sealed. She screamed when the change began. Feathers burst from her back, tearing the cloak in half. Her arms wrenched backward, the bones grinding as they elongated. Her legs twisted beneath her, the knees snapping and reversing direction. She fell forward, gagging, as her skin pulled taut and her mouth stretched into a hard, hook-like beak. But worst of all was her mind. As the transformation overtook her, so did forgetting. Her name, her face, her father's voice, all of it slid away like water from feathers. When it was done, she stood at the lake's edge on spindly legs, wings outstretched, panting. A swan, but not white. Her feathers were mottled, stained with red where they had grown through open wounds. Her eyes were still too human, wide, terrified. The others joined her, dozens of them, gliding from the lake's far end, all with similar malformed wings and faces frozen in mute horror. None of them spoke, but Odette understood. Each one had been a girl once. Years passed, though she could not say how many. Time meant nothing on the lake. The sun rarely rose above the trees, and the moon always seemed too large, too close, like a watching eye. She swam by instinct. She slept in reeds. She watched new girls arrive and lose themselves. Some tried to escape. None succeeded. Their feathers scattered like snow on the water. At night, When the moon was full, they danced. The masked one, Rothbart, she had learned his name in dreams, would play a violin made of sinew and bone. The melody would twist into their skulls, pulling their limbs like marionette strings. They danced on the lake until their feet bled, until their joints failed, until they fell into the water, gasping for breath. And when they drowned, they were reborn again by morning. It was not death, it was a ritual. He fed off them, but one night Odette felt something stir in her chest, a spark, a name, not hers, another's, Siegfried. It came unbidden, like a thorn in the mind. She remembered a hand reaching for hers, a promise, eyes that didn't belong to Rothbart, eyes that were kind, gentle, a boy she'd once seen on the edge of the forest, just before the dreams began, a prince, maybe, or a hunter. He had watched her dance beneath the trees, not knowing she wasn't truly in control. She hadn't seen him since, but the memory had taken root, and that made Rothbart furious. The music that night was violent, jagged. He dragged her through the dance with cruel glee, pulling her body into contortions that left her crippled in the reeds for days. The other swans wouldn't meet her eyes. She wasn't just cursed, she was becoming dangerous. But it also meant the spell was breaking. She began to remember other things, the shape of her room, the way cinnamon tasted, her mother's voice, whispering lullabies in a language she hadn't heard in years. Her soul was surfacing, and that was when Siegfried returned. He came to the lake at dusk, dressed in furs, bow in hand, face older but unmistakable. He looked across the water with eyes wide and searching. Something in him recognized her, even through the feathers and twisted form. "Odette," he said softly. She could not answer. Her beak opened, but only a screech escaped. Still, she rushed to him, wings flapping, water spraying in her wake, and he didn't flee. He stood his ground, reaching for her face, as if he still saw the girl beneath the horror. But Rothbart was already there. The forest roared. He rose from the lake behind her, wings stretching impossibly wide, face a mask of pure loathing. "She is mine." Siegfried stepped back, drawing his blade. "I know what you are. You know nothing." The mask split open, and beneath it there was no face at all, only a gaping void, sucking in light, a mouth without end. The forest screamed, the lake boiled beneath Rothbart as he rose. Waves lashed against the shore, churning black as oil. The sky twisted with him, clouds spiraling like ink in water, and the moon, that monstrous, swollen moon, flickered like a lantern in a storm. His mask hung in the air above his shoulders now, floating like a pale ghost, disconnected from the gaping black pit that swirled in place of a face. Siegfried could not move. His sword, once a symbol of royal heritage and strength, felt like a twig in his grasp. It trembled in his hand, Not from cowardice. He had hunted wolves, fought men, bled in battle, but from something deeper, a knowing, the way prey recognizes a predator by silence alone. Rothbart did not breathe. He pulsed. Odette's wings flared around Siegfried, shielding him, her blood-stained feathers slick with lake water and trembling. Her long neck turned toward him, and though she could not speak, he saw the panic in her eyes. Run. But Siegfried stood his ground. You have no power over me, he said. The mask turned toward him, slowly. The void behind it rippled, and a voice emerged, not spoken, but felt, like a thought injected into the brain with a rusted nail. Then why do your hands shake, little prince? The air thickened, crushing the trees around the lake into crooked, bent silhouettes. The other swans had vanished into the reeds, heads bowed, refusing to look. Odette remained where she was, but her body quivered, one leg nearly collapsing beneath her. She wasn't just cursed, she was bound. Every second near Rothbart drained her strength, as though he fed from the very essence of what she had left. Siegfried stepped forward. I've seen your kind in old texts, he said. They call you the unshaped, the ones who hunger for worship but never had form. The void writhed. Words from books, Rothbart hissed. Paper cannot stop what is ancient. I've come to break her curse. Her curse is her form. What will you return her to? The girl who drank from the lake willingly, the one who came back. Siegfried faltered, but only for a breath. He didn't know what Rothbart meant, not fully, but Odette cried out behind him, wings stretching forward, brushing his arm with a desperate softness. She's not yours, Siegfried said. Not anymore. Rothbart's voice dropped to a whisper, low and intimate. Then take her. The sky went black. When Siegfried woke, it was morning. The lake was calm again, impossibly still, reflecting the grey dawn sky like a polished mirror. No swans, no fog, no Rothbart. Odette lay beside him, human again. She was naked, her skin pale and blue-tinged from the cold, her dark hair soaked and plastered to her face. He gathered her in his arms without thinking, wrapping his cloak around her shivering form. Her fingers curled into his chest, as if trying to remember how to hold. She blinked slowly. You came back. He smiled, but the edges of it didn't reach his eyes. I told you I would. You shouldn't have. They left the lake before nightfall. Siegfried had brought a horse, but it had bolted some time during the storm. He and Odette travelled on foot, following the path through Godless Hollow that had somehow reappeared, as if the forest had grown tired of the game and wanted them gone. She spoke little. Her voice was raw, brittle, like glass rubbed with sand. Each word seemed an effort, and the further they walked, the more pain etched itself across her face. Her fingers spasmed at intervals, and her spine arched like she was holding something back. At one point, she stopped and dropped to her knees, gagging. He knelt beside her, holding her shoulders as she retched. and from her mouth came not bile, but water, cold, dark, and glistening with flecks of something that shimmered like fish scales. "It's not gone," she whispered, shaking. "He's still inside me." They reached the ruins of a monastery by dusk, crumbling stone walls covered in ivy, long abandoned, the roof torn open to the stars. Siegfried laid her on what remained of the altar, brushing strands of hair from her face. "We can find someone," he said. "A priest, a mage. There must be someone who can undo what he did." Odette stared at the ceiling. Her voice, when it came, was hollow. "There is no spell, no breaking. I am the curse now." "You're wrong." She looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment her eyes weren't Odette's at all. They were glossy, black and bird-like. Then they were human again. "You think love saves things?" she said quietly. "But sometimes it just makes the dying slower." Siegfried said nothing. She reached for his hand and placed something in it, a feather. That night he woke to the sound of wings. Feathers scraped against stone, and something heavy shifted in the rafters above. He sat up, hand to his blade, but Odette was still lying on the altar. She hadn't moved, but the shadows had. Figures stood at the edge of the ruined chapel, thin, pale, drenched in lake water, eyes wide with a kind of mindless reverence. The other swans, now girls again, or what was left of them. They stared at Odette like she was a beacon, a goddess. One stepped forward and knelt, then another and another. They filled the room with the scent of algae and rot, whispering a language that wasn't words. The walls pulsed with it. Odette rose. She hovered a full inch off the altar, her body limp, arms spread like wings, her head tilted back, and a sound emerged from her mouth, not her voice, but a scream that cracked the stone. The other girls began to weep. Blood ran from their eyes, staining the floor in rivulets. Odette's body jerked forward, and Rothbart stepped from her shadow. He was not whole, not anymore. His form stuttered, flickering like a flame in wind. Half of his face was missing, a smoking void where the mask had been shattered. His wings were tattered, dripping black liquid, trailing long strings of shadow that slithered across the floor like serpents. He didn't speak this time. He opened his mouth, and the chapel bent toward him. Siegfried clutched his ears as a sound like breaking teeth filled the air. The girls screamed, and one by one they began to convulse, their bodies writhing, folding inward. Their limbs snapped, their faces twisted, and they became swans. Not graceful birds, but malformed, skeletal creatures with patchy feathers and eyes like drowned corpses. Siegfried grabbed Odette by the shoulders. "You can fight him!" Her eyes fluttered open. "I'm tired," she said. He pulled her close. "You're not his. You're Odette. You're not what he made you." For a moment she was silent. Then she whispered, "Then kiss me." He did, and the chapel exploded, not in fire or light, but in wind, hurricane-force gales that blasted stone from the walls, tearing ivy into the sky. The swans shrieked and scattered. Rothbart howled, a sound like knives dragged across bone, and burst into 100 shards of shadow that fled in every direction. Odette collapsed in his arms, limp. Siegfried clutched her, sobbing, shaking, unsure if she was alive, unsure if anything had worked. And then her hand moved. She sat up, and her feathers were gone. They buried the other girls. All of them, the swan forms, had fallen still. Their bodies returned to human after Rothbart vanished, and they lay peacefully beneath the stone ruins, as if finally allowed rest. Odette wept for each one. She named them, though she did not remember all their names. The names came to her like echoes, like things she once knew, long ago, before the curse rewrote her memories. She and Siegfried left the hollow together, and for a time the world was still. But magic never dies, it only sleeps. And one day, as Odette sat by a river near their new home, sketching the trees in the margins of an old journal, she pricked her finger on the tip of her quill. Blood welled, and from that drop a feather unfurled. It was pure white, then it turned black. The feather did not dissolve, it pulsed. Odette stared at it in silence as it lay in her palm. Not a simple quill, not an ordinary plume, but something alive. The barbs twitched subtly in the afternoon sun, curling inward like the legs of a dying spider. She had plucked swan feathers before, long ago, when her body had belonged to one, when wings folded against her back like armour. This was not the same. It bled into her skin. The black seeped from the shaft like ink in water, creeping along the lines of her hand, burrowing into her pores. Her breath hitched, and for a moment she swore she heard the lake, not the river before her now, but that lake, the one in Godless Hollow, the one that had no bottom, the one that fed on names. She clenched her fist. When she opened it again, the feather was gone. Siegfried was in the nearby orchard when she found him. He had taken to planting apple trees along the slope of the hill, claiming that someday they'd have a whole grove for their children to play in. He was bent at the waist, shirtless, under the early autumn sun, his hands caked in loam. Odette didn't speak right away. She simply knelt beside him and touched his shoulder. He glanced up, smiling. "You're pale." "I found something," she said. "Or maybe it found me." He rose slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What do you mean?" "I think it's starting again." That night, she dreamt of feathers, thousands of them, floating from the sky like ash. They coated the land, the sea, even the stars. Beneath them, the lake churned, only it was no longer water. It was eyes, billions of eyes, all blinking in perfect sync. And Rothbart stood on the shore. He had no face now, only the mask, stitched onto skin. The void was gone. In its place was something worse. Identity. He turned toward her, and the voice that emerged was not his. It was hers. "You kissed me. You broke me." She woke screaming. Odette tried to ignore the signs. The feather, the dream, the way her reflection in the well no longer mirrored her movements perfectly. She buried herself in work, drying herbs, stitching winter clothes, mending the cottage's loose shutters. Siegfried noticed, of course, but said nothing. He watched her from a distance, as though waiting for her to speak what both of them feared. It wasn't until she saw the swan that she could no longer lie. It stood on the edge of the forest at dawn, watching her, not moving, not blinking. Its wings were wrong, jointed backward, thin as bone, tipped with something that looked too much like fingers. Odette stepped toward it. It didn't flee. Instead, it nodded and vanished into the trees. "Godless Hollow is waking," she said that night, seated at the table with Siegfried. Her voice was flat. He didn't look up from the maps he had spread across the table, but his hand stilled. "You're sure?" "I felt it in my hand. The feather. It burned its way in." Siegfried exhaled slowly. "Then we destroy it. We return. We finish it for good." Odette shook her head. "I don't think it can be destroyed. Not like that. Rothbart wasn't just some warlock. He was the hollow, the curse, the swans, the lake. They were all pieces of him." He finally met her eyes. "Then what do we do?" Odette reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in black cloth. Unfolded, it revealed a shard of mirror. Not just any mirror, the one from the chapel altar, the one that had cracked when Rothbart died, the last time she had looked into it. It showed her wings growing from her spine. Now, it showed her face, but not as it was, as it would be. Eyes black, lips stitched, a crown of feathers, not gold. "I think I'm turning into him," she whispered. They returned to Godless Hollow by moonlight. The forest had changed. Where once the trees merely leaned, now they arched into unnatural shapes, twisted into archways, doorways, spires. The bark wept dark sap, and the roots throbbed as if drawing blood from beneath the earth. The birds had all gone silent. No wolves howled, no wind stirred. It was like the world itself was holding its breath. Siegfried held Odette's hand tightly. He carried the mirror shard in one pocket, a blade in the other. Around his neck, he wore a relic, a small silver charm, blessed by an old nun in the next village, carved in the shape of a crescent moon. "It won't work against him," Odette said as they walked. "It's not holy that hurts Rothbart, it's memory." "Then we remember who you are," he replied. She did not answer. The lake was smaller now, as if it had dried in their absence. Its edges cracked with salt, the surface slick and still. The moon cast no reflection. Odette stepped toward it. Siegfried tried to follow, but the moment her foot touched the water, an invisible barrier forced him back. His chest slammed against air made solid. He clawed at it, screamed her name, but she did not turn. She walked across the water as if it were glass, and the lake split, not in waves or ripples, but vertically, like a mouth opening. She vanished inside. Odette fell through memory. She plummeted past versions of herself. A child chasing swans with a wooden sword. A girl wading into the lake to escape her father's wrath. A creature in feathers drowning over and over in dreams. Each reflection clung to her, pulling, whispering, "You love the curse. You chose him. You were made for this." Then she hit bottom. There was no lake, no forest, no moon, just a stage, lit by candlelight. A marionette stood at the centre, strung by cords made of hair. It turned toward her, and its face was her own, painted white, eyes hollow, mouth stitched shut. Odette stepped forward. The marionette lifted its arms, mimicking her. "Do you know who you are?" a voice asked. "Rothbart," but not from outside, from within. "I'm Odette," she said. The marionette tilted its head. "That's not your real name." "I chose it," she said. The candles blew out. Siegfried screamed her name until his voice broke. Then suddenly, she rose from the lake, but it was not the same Odette. Her skin was pale, her hair longer than it had ever been, trailing behind her like a shroud. She wore a dress made of feathers, but they shimmered in shades of black and violet, not white. Her eyes were closed. When they opened, they were hers again, and not. Rothbart stood behind them, or perhaps within her. His shape flickered in the water, like a shadow cast by a flame without a source. "I took the hollow," she said, her voice layered. Hers, his, and something older still. Siegfried stepped back. "You? What?" "I couldn't kill it, so I swallowed it." The lake began to drain. The sky cracked. The world bent around her. "I am the cage now," she whispered. "I hold the curse. I am the curse." Siegfried reached for her. "Then let me stay with you." She smiled, and for a moment she was just Odette again. "I won't be me for long." The forest burned for 3 days. Fire with no smoke, flame with no heat. When it ended, the hollow was gone, lake and all, leaving behind only scorched earth. They never found the bodies, but sometimes, in the deepest parts of night, villagers near the edge of the old woods claim they see swans in the mist, not white, not black, purple, and they do not fly. They watch, not as Odette. That name no longer belonged to the girl who walked from the drained lake with feathers stitched beneath her skin. In the months that followed the fire, local legends simply called her the Hollow Bride. She wore no crown, yet all things in the forest bowed to her. She bled no blood, yet all things in the dark knew her scent. The prince was never seen again, but that wasn't quite true. Siegfried had not died when the hollow consumed her, only vanished. Those who claimed to hear his voice said it came in dreams, not as words, but as songs, low, aching melodies. sung in a language no longer spoken by men, only birds, and it was that same song that brought the first of the girls. She arrived at twilight, barefoot and dazed, her hair tangled with leaves, her arms wrapped tight around a feather she would not release. When the townsfolk asked her name, she simply wept. She would not speak, but each night she walked to the charred edge of Godless Hollow and stood there, watching, waiting, and after her came another and another. Odette knew them before they arrived. She felt them stirring in the world, drawn like moths to flame, the cursed, the broken, the forgotten. They bore their suffering in silence, and she heard them all. Each one added a note to the song she carried now in her chest. Not a melody, but a lamentation, a sound too deep for ears, a music of bone and ash and memory. She had become the vessel of the hollow, not by conquest, but by consent. On the 6th new moon since her return, the sky opened. It did not rain, it did not storm, it split, a vertical tear, stretching from horizon to horizon. From it, light poured like molten glass, thick and slow, and descending from that wound in the sky came masks, thousands of them, porcelain, wooden, carved from horn and mirror. They floated downward like leaves, and where they landed, people forgot themselves. One man awoke with no memory of his children. A woman tore the mirrors from her home, screaming at the stranger in the reflection. The masks did not whisper, they erased, and in the woods the hollow bride opened her mouth and sang their names back into being. But even she was not untouched. The song had a price. Each time she called a name, she forgot one of her own, a memory, a dream, a moment once hers. Slowly, she was shedding herself like feathers, not in pain, but peacefully, like it was always meant to happen. It terrified her, because when she was gone, only he would remain. Rothbart, he was not dead, only sleeping, curled deep in the marrow of her spine, and she knew, with every note she sang, he grew stronger. The villagers begged the abbey for help. Holy men came, bearing relics and incense, and faith sharpened like daggers. They found the hollow empty, devoid of her or her followers. The trees had moved, the lake bed had grown thorns. They tried to burn what remained. The fire turned inward. One priest collapsed with eyes full of feathers. Another walked into the lake bed and drowned in air. The rest fled, whispering that the hollow was not a place anymore. It was a body, and it walked. That winter, a girl named Leora found the bride. She was 12, blind in one eye, and marked from birth with a strange pattern of freckles that coiled around her wrist like a bracelet. Her village had cast her out, claiming she was a changeling, touched by fae, or worse. She followed the song, not the melody in the sky, but a deeper one, a humming in her bones, like something inside her was tuning itself to a forgotten frequency. She walked for days. When she arrived at the hollow, the trees parted. The bride waited. "Why have you come?" she asked, her voice like wind through bones. Leora knelt, not in worship, but in recognition. "You called me." The bride touched her cheek, and for the first time in years, Odette wept, because Leora did not smell of magic. She smelled of home. Siegfried returned on the 7th moon, not in body, not as a man, but as a mirror. The cracked fragment Odette had carried for so long reassembled itself in the glade beneath the twisted willow tree. It did not reflect the world as it was, but as it might have been. He stood inside it, unaged, unchanged, smiling. "Odette," he said, "you don't have to carry it all." She sank to her knees. "You don't understand," she whispered. "There's no one else. I'm the only thing keeping him from devouring everything." Siegfried raised his hand. Behind the glass, the sky was whole, the forest green, her dress white again. "I'll take part of it. Share it with me." She shook her head. "If I give you a piece, it will never leave you." His eyes didn't flinch. "I never wanted to be whole." And with that, he reached through the mirror, and she let him. The scream shattered the trees for miles. Every bird fell from the sky. The moon bled black for 3 nights. And when silence returned, the hollow was gone. In its place stood a great tree, its bark pale as bone, its branches curled into a crown. At its roots lay 2 figures carved from stone, a woman with wings folded like prayer, and a man with hands outstretched. No one approached it, but every so often, when the wind was right, they said you could hear a song coming from its hollow heart, a duet. The tree stood where the hollow had once breathed, a towering monument, pale and smooth, its bark devoid of grain or age rings, its roots coiled like sleeping serpents across the dead earth, and in its branches no bird would perch. The village called it the mourning tree. Others named it the swan tomb, but none dared touch it, not after the 7th day. That was when the first villager went missing, and the wind began to sing. Her name was Maris. She had been drawn by dreams, visions of a forest unburned, of swans that whispered riddles in her sleep. Her sister said she woke at midnight and walked barefoot into the frost-covered fields, eyes open but unseeing. She never returned. Only her boots were found, placed neatly at the base of the tree. Tucked inside one was a feather, purple. Odette's memory was fraying. Inside the bark she slumbered, not dead, not alive, entombed between 2 moments, the woman she had been and the thing she had become. She no longer remembered what sunlight felt like. She couldn't recall the colour of Siegfried's eyes, only that they had once looked at her like she was not a weapon. Only Leora remembered. The girl returned, older now, hair darker, eyes wide, with unspoken knowing. She wore a crown of sticks and carried no blade. When she touched the mourning tree, It whispered, one root, two hearts, one song, two singers, one curse, never buried. She placed her palm flat against the bark, and it moved, not like wood, like flesh. The villagers tried to stop her. They called her cursed, mad, possessed. They locked her in the chapel cellar, where no light reached and the walls wept from old rot. She stayed there 3 nights, carving runes into the stone with her fingernails. When they opened the door on the 4th day, she was gone. In her place was a mirror, old and dusted with ash. Etched at its centre was a symbol no one recognised, a feather curled around a spiral. Leora walked the dead forest as one walks a memory, gently, with reverence. The trees bowed away from her path. Animals did not flee. Even the wind bent to listen. She followed the song, not the one in the air, that sorrowful hum born from the tree's marrow, but the one beneath it, the dirge. She had heard it since birth, faint and slow, like a heartbeat under stone. She knew it now for what it was, the memory of a god who no longer remembered himself. She reached the tree at dusk. It opened for her. The hollow within was deeper than the roots suggested. It spiraled downward in endless coils, carved from bone and ash, dripping with black sap that whispered truths she could not unhear. She is not asleep. He is not dead. You are not the first. At the bottom, she found the throne. It was not made of gold or stone, but memory, knotted strands of forgotten names, stitched into a shape. Upon it sat the hollow bride, her wings folded, her eyes closed. Around her, the air shimmered with the weight of grief. Leora knelt. I've come to break the curse. Odette's eyes opened, and they were full of Rothbard. You cannot break what you are, the hollow said. Her voice echoed, not in the chamber, but in Leora's thoughts. It was song, it was silence, it was thunder behind her ribs. You carry the seed, she continued. I planted it the day you were born. Leora shook her head. You didn't. He did. But you're not him anymore. Odette stood, her wings unfurled. The feathers fell like shards of night. Do you believe that? I do, Leora whispered, and in that moment the throne wept. Siegfried emerged from the shadows, not a man, not a ghost, but a reflection. He stepped from the mirror that hovered behind the throne, his form flickering with each heartbeat. His gaze met Odette's, and for the first time in decades, she looked ashamed. I tried to hold it, she said, but it fed on me. It made me forget. Siegfried smiled gently. I remember, for both of us. He took her hand, and something snapped. The mourning tree split open. A soundless quake ripped through the glade, and from within its pale trunk poured a torrent of black feathers. They whirled like a storm, circling upward in a vortex, howling in every forgotten tongue. The villagers screamed. Some fled, others fell to their knees, eyes blank, mouths open. From within the storm walked 3 figures, Leora, Odette, Siegfried, but not as they had been. Each bore the marks of the hollow, yet none were cursed. Their eyes glowed violet, their skin traced with feathered veins, and as they moved, the wind knelt before them. The hollow was not dead, it had changed. That spring, the forest grew again, but not as before. The trees whispered songs to those who listened. The lakes reflected not faces, but truths. Swans returned, not white, not black, but shimmering with iridescent hues no painter could replicate. And on the shores, children sometimes saw a woman with wings. She would kneel beside them and ask a single question. "What have you forgotten?" If they answered truly, she would pluck a feather from her side and give it to them. No one knew what the feathers did, only that those who kept them never dreamed the same again. The children began to change. At first, it was small things, hair that shimmered like oil in sunlight, voices that echoed when no one spoke. They drew pictures in the dirt that twisted and slithered when the wind passed over them. One girl named Brinna refused to walk through doors anymore. She said there were things behind the thresholds, watching her, holding their breath. The villagers whispered of curses, of forest witches, but those who had seen the tree, truly seen it, said nothing at all. They only listened because in the silence, something new was breathing. A marsh bloomed where the hollow once burned. It grew quickly, unnaturally, seeping outward like spilled ink. The reeds were black, the lilies wept dew like blood, and floating among the lily pads were feathers, thousands of them, none matching in colour or texture, as if from no single bird. They called it Mirafen. The first to enter never came out. The second did, but walked backward for the rest of her life. She never blinked again. The third returned singing, but it was not a song of this world. Leora stood at the edge of Mirafen, her reflection flickering in the black water. Behind her, the forest shimmered in hues unknown to human eyes. In her hand was a feather, long, violet, and sharp at the tip. Not a gift, a key. "Will it remember me?" she asked. Odette stood beside her, silent. Her wings no longer hung heavy. They had merged into her skin, faint and ghost-like, reminders of what she had once surrendered. "If it does," she finally said, "it may not like what it remembers." They stepped into the water together. Mirafen was not a place, it was a mind, a pulsing memory of everything Rothbart had ever devoured. Souls twisted into patterns, echoing endlessly, reflecting their pain back upon themselves. The water did not ripple, it watched, and as Odette passed through it, she felt it reach for her, like a child recognizing its mother. But she was not here to cradle it, she was here to end it. They walked for hours through mirrored light. Sky became lake, lake became breath. The world inverted itself until the only direction was inward. Around them, faces flickered in the black, reflections of the cursed, girls with no mouths, boys stitched with nettles, infants with eyes like candle wicks. "Where are they?" Leora whispered. "Everywhere," Odette said, "and nowhere. She raised the violet feather. It split the air like a blade. Ahead, the water peeled back, and Rothbart opened his eye. It was not a beast they faced, not a man, not a demon. Rothbart had become place, a consciousness stretched over centuries of grief and hunger. The lake, the reeds, the sky, the very idea of pain within the mirror fen was him. His form coalesced only to communicate, and when it did, it was her face he wore, Odette's, twisted, mouth wide, feathered with teeth, eyes hollowed into rings of flame. The voice echoed from every tree. You never left me. You are me. Leora did not flinch. She stepped forward, lifted the feather, and drove it into her own palm. Blood spilled across the reeds. The lake screamed, and Rothbart surged forward, his form rising from the waters like a cathedral built of bones and wings and mouths. He thundered with every forgotten curse, every name lost in the hollow's memory. Shadows rose like smoke, lost souls tethered to his being, and Odette knew if they failed now, he would take form forever. But Leora did not scream. She sang. Her voice was not beautiful. It was raw, cracked, trembling with memory and fury and love. The sound of a child denied, a girl cursed, a life twisted by fate. But it was heard, and it cut deeper than any blade. Odette joined her. Their duet shattered the illusion of form. Rothbart howled as his borrowed face crumbled. Feathers caught fire, the marsh convulsed, trees cracked inward, the world bent towards silence, and at the centre, the throne of memory collapsed. When it ended, the water was still. No reflections, no faces, just a clear pool, shallow and calm, cradling two feathers, one violet, one silver. Leora surfaced alone. Odette was gone, not destroyed, dispersed. The villagers saw the change at once. The mourning tree shed its bark, revealing a trunk of white stone. The children's strange traits faded. The air stopped singing, but some mourned. They felt a presence missing, a gentleness beneath the horror, something that had made their grief feel seen. The forest was quieter, the dreams less vivid. Leora did not return to the village. She remained by the lake. Each morning she sang, not to awaken the hollow, but to remember it. The hollow was gone, yet its absence clung to the land like morning fog, not oppressive, but intimate. It settled into the trees, the wind, the water. Something had been unravelled from the world, and though peace returned, it was not the peace they remembered. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds sang differently now. Leora remained by the lake. Some days she walked its perimeter in silence. Other days she sang strange melodies without words, the kind you remembered only after waking from a dream. Children came to watch her. They didn't speak. They simply stood barefoot in the shallows, listening. When their parents called, they went home quietly, their eyes wide and thoughtful. One child whispered, "She sings to the ones beneath." Another said, "She's teaching the lake how to dream." No one argued. In the 3rd month after the breaking of the mourning tree, a man arrived in the village. He wore no cloak despite the cold. His clothes were grey, loose, and hung strangely, like they didn't quite understand how to fit a body. His hair was bone white, yet he did not appear old. His eyes were pale violet, so pale they shimmered. He did not knock on any doors. He walked straight to the lake. Leora was waiting for him. She had seen him in her dreams, walking backward through mirrors, singing songs in reverse. He had no name, not anymore, but once, in the deepest part of Mirafen, she had seen his true form, the first watcher, born not of womb, but of sorrow, a soul formed by the hollow to remember what it devoured. "You've come for the memory," she said. He nodded. "It is unanchored. If we do not bind it, it will scatter." Leora lowered her gaze. "Then take it." The watcher lifted his mirror. It was not like the others, not a reflection, but a vessel. Its surface rippled as though alive, showing fragments of time. Odette in her swan form, Siegfried weeping by the lake, Leora as a child clutching a single black feather. He stepped into the lake, submerging the mirror slowly. The water turned to glass, and from within rose the last reflection. Odette. She was not whole, not entirely. More dream than memory, more song than shape. Her wings unfolded as mist, and her face was calm, unreadable, like something sacred and forgotten. She looked at Leora and smiled. "I remember now," she said, though her lips did not move. "I was not the curse. I was the cage." The watcher trembled. "She is fading." Leora reached forward, touching Odette's hand. It passed through her like sunlight through fog. "I'm not here to hold you," she said. "I'm here to let you go." The mirror glowed. A pulse of light burst from its surface, and for a moment every tree in the forest bloomed with black feathers. The lake boiled with silver, and the sky opened into a single great eye, watching, weeping, witnessing. Odette rose higher, and as she did, she began to unravel, not in pain, in peace. Her body dissolved into strands of light, each thread a memory freed, of dancing, of sorrow, of lullabies, and swan song, and cold nights by firelight. The wind caught them, the world caught them, and when she was gone, the mirror no longer shone. It cracked, then shattered. The watcher collapsed. The burden was gone. His body, no longer sustained by the hollow's weight, began to decay before their eyes, turning to dust, to ash, to petals of white swan down. Leora knelt beside the remains. She did not cry. She pressed the 2 feathers she always carried, one silver, one violet, into the ground, and a flower bloomed, black as the lake. That night, the villagers dreamed, each and every one. They stood in a vast field beneath a violet sky. Above them flew thousands of swans, none alike, none whole, yet all free. In the centre of the field stood Leora, not a girl, not a woman, but something between. Something remembered. She said one word, rest. And when they awoke, the silence had changed. It was no longer hollow, it was full. In the years that followed, the lake became sacred. No one fished in it, no one bathed. Instead, they came to speak to it. They left letters at the shore, paper birds, and wax-sealed jars filled with tears and songs. And on rare occasions, the lake would answer, a ripple across the surface, a feather left on a doorstep, a dream too vivid to forget. No one saw Leora again, but the children born after swore she never left, that when the moon was right and the air still, you could see her walking across the lake's surface, humming. The lake never froze again. No matter how bitter the winter grew, its waters remained liquid, smooth as glass, black as ink, untouched by frost. The villagers learned not to question this. It was not unnatural, it was sacred. They called it the Lake of Memory now. Some called it the Hollow's Wake. The oldest among them said it was not water at all anymore, that it had become song, congealed and still, waiting to be remembered. But no one dared sing to it, no one except the girl in white. They say she returns on the longest night of the year, alone, barefoot, wearing a crown of bone-white feathers, eyes like twin moons. She steps onto the surface and walks out to the centre, never sinking, never disturbed. Then she begins to sing. No words, no melody anyone can mimic, just a low, unearthly hum, a lullaby for the forgotten, a requiem for the drowned. And as she sings, the waters stir. Sometimes a face rises, not physical, not even spectral, just an echo. Sometimes the reeds shudder, whispering names that haven't been spoken in centuries. And sometimes, for a breathless moment, the hollow opens again, not to curse, not to devour, but to remember. The world beyond the lake has changed. Villages now stretch wider, stone replaces wood, roads cut through the edges of forest once considered haunted. Few remember what stood here before, fewer still believe the stories, but the land remembers, and so do the birds. They avoid the lake, flock around it like a dark sun. Some land on the shore, heads bowed, wings folded tight, as if paying respects to something larger than gods. On occasion, a swan emerges from the forest, only one at a time. It walks to the water's edge, dips its beak once, then turns to face the woods again, waiting. Some say it guards the lake, others claim it waits for the girl, Leora, to return and finish what she began. But no one truly knows what waits beneath the still water, not anymore. In a ruined chapel north of the lake, something stirs. The roof long since collapsed. Moss covers what once were pews. Vines coil through shattered stained glass windows, twisting into shapes that don't belong to any plant of this world. In the centre, a cracked altar, and upon it, a mask, not carved, not made, grown, feathers stitched to flesh, bone reshaped into elegance. It hums softly when touched, and when someone foolish enough places it on their face, the world shifts, time unravels, air thickens, and the lake calls. It happened once. A boy no older than 10. He wandered into the chapel during a storm. They say he found the mask and wore it. They say his screams didn't come from his mouth, but from every wall of the village. They found him the next morning on the chapel steps, alive, unchanged, except he wouldn't speak, not ever again, and his shadow moved in ways shadows should not. They buried the mask beneath the altar after that, locking it in place with salt and thread and the bones of birds, but the mask hums still, waiting. They say the hollow was not the only place, that other lakes dream too, other forests, that Rothbart was not born. He was summoned, shaped by grief, and given form by belief, and what was broken here might only have slumbered elsewhere. That Leora, in ending him, fed him to the roots of the world, and something else is growing, something old, something listening, but the lake is quiet for now, and Leora, if she still lives, she is no longer a flesh. Her form has faded from history and woven into folklore. The children sing of her in songs too old for their parents to remember, using words that don't belong to any language spoken today. They hum her tune when they're afraid. They draw her wings in the dirt. They whisper her name at night when the moon is brightest. Odette, but Odette is gone. Only Leora remains, and she is watching. When the next girl is born beneath a stormy sky, feathered down on her shoulder blades, and eyes pale as frost, the midwife drops the child, not in fear, in awe. The room fills with music no one can place, a melody trapped in blood, singing through bone. And as the girl begins to cry, the lake ripples, though no wind stirs. A new song has begun, and all the world will listen.